Croeso. Welcome to the Cymru Centre of Excellence for Bovine Tuberculosis. I've had over 30 years of experience with bovine tuberculosis in one form or another. I led the bovine TB science at the Animal and Plant Health Agency for over 20 years, and at one stage was the chief scientist of the Animal and Plant Health Agency as well. And then for the last 4 years, I've had the privilege of holding a Cymru chair to build a centre of excellence for bovine TB here in Aberystwyth. What was really important to me was to build skills in a number of areas that I thought would help whales to become resilient to animal disease. The first one was to really build skills to understand how the animal reacts to infection, so in this case cows, and developing the immunology to look at how an animal responds to infection. The second thing to understand was from the bug point of view. So looking at the bug and are there chinks in its armour that we can exploit in order to understand how it's being transmitted in whales and ways that we might overcome that. So working very closely with the Animal and Plant Health Agency, we started looking at the epidemiology of the disease, i.e. how is it spreading in whales? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? And we created heat maps to show where in Wales things were improving, and actually the exciting thing was that using increased testing of cows, we saw that in most areas of Wales things were getting better, but in some areas things were getting worse, and this allowed us to advise Welsh Government on where the hotspots were emerging, where Wales could focus their efforts on TB control, and also for us to look to try and understand why things were getting worse in those areas. For the Centre of Excellence for Bovine TB to be a true Centre of Excellence is to translate what we were learning into policy and to exchange that information with other stakeholders like farmers and vets so that they could use the information to make a difference. And not only did we exchange knowledge, but we also held workshops to ask all the stakeholders what they would do as a result of this knowledge. So one of the areas that I think is very exciting that we had established once we'd created that trust with our veterinary and farming community was to set up on-farm studies. So I'd spent most of my life over the last 30 years of looking at diagnostics and vaccines, working with experimental models of infection, whereas now we're taking our knowledge onto the farm and trying to understand what happens at a farm level in terms of diagnostics, in terms of animals that might be infected with more than one infection, and what the implications of that are on diagnostic tests and our ability to eradicate TB. And so I think this is a really important future step, is working with farmers on farm to understand what goes on in the real world.
My name's Christiane Glossop. I was Chief Veterinary Officer for Wales up until the autumn of 2022. One of my main responsibilities as CVO Wales was to oversee the TB eradication programme here, which obviously is one of the biggest challenges facing the cattle herd of Wales. So the Cymru programme has had a significant impact on bovine TB in Wales from its earliest days, I would suggest. First of all, it, I think, showed the farmers and the vets in Wales that we collectively mean business when it comes to TB eradication, and that we're really keen to underpin all the field work with that sound scientific foundation stone to make sure that we could always be applying the newest technologies, keeping a real connection between the science and what's happening at the coalface of TB eradication. It takes a long time to make a difference with bovine TB, and you can measure success in many different ways. And so it's really important to take account of the epidemiology, the hotspot areas, and the Sair Cymru programme has definitely helped already in focusing in on those hotspot areas, understanding what's happening and connecting the science with the interventions with the farms on the ground in certain areas. So I'd suggest that's one of the first impactful contributions that the Sair Cymru programme has made to TB eradication. I mean, it's been vital for Wales to have a hub of excellence in veterinary research, particularly focusing in on our biggest disease challenge for the cattle herd. And so it was very logical that we focused on TB, and that we didn't just create a virtual structure, but there was an actual focused set of high standard, state-of-the-art laboratories staffed with cutting-edge scientists, so that putting all that together has given us a hub, a focus for research. And all eyes are on Aberystwyth. Of course it needs to be in Aberystwyth. When you look at the history of the university, the close connection with agriculture over so many years, and the fact that we have the Wales Veterinary Science Centre here in Aberystwyth, we have our fledgling School of Veterinary Science, and the Vet Hub 1 and the Sair Cymru Centre coming together so that farmers and vets can really identify with and support the activity. And there's so many synergies between those different elements of the hub that we have.
My experience with bovine tuberculosis is a long one. I come from a farming background, and like so many from that area, many of us have stories that are close to us about bovine tuberculosis. My research experience with tuberculosis is equally varied and wide. First, I started as a clinical scientist within Health Protection Agency at the National Reference Laboratory for Tuberculosis. I then moved on to a postdoctoral research project looking at the bacterial determinants, genetic determinants that lead to the progression of disease. And finally, here at the Centre of Excellence for Bovine Tuberculosis, I work on the innate immune responses, those early events that lead to the progression of bovine tuberculosis. So there are two main large-scale projects that we're involved with here at the Centre of Excellence for Bovine Tuberculosis. One of them is the duration of immunity study. This study allows us to understand how long the duration of immunity lasts for when cattle are vaccinated with the M. bovis BCG vaccine. And this is important because this is one of the control strategies that will be used in the future within the UK to control bovine tuberculosis. Currently, there are field trials ongoing to establish the connection between vaccination of our national herd and implementation of novel diagnostics. The duration of immunity study allows us to academically probe and understand how long duration of immunity lasts for, and the cellular and chemical players that drive this long duration of immunity induced by M. bovis BCG vaccination. The second study that we're involved with is an on-farm study known as the persistence study, which allows us to track on-farm with good relationships with both our farming community and our veterinary community to understand the situation on the ground, on farms where there is persistent TB infection. We work with the farmers and local veterinarians to understand the implication of co-infection within a farm unit and how this might impact bovine tuberculosis diagnosis and control. This allows us to, over a longitudinal period, understand how the infection is tracking through a given farm holding and how we might best be able to use this information to help farmers on the ground.